Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you guys are having a great week so far. I know it's kind of early, but it's only going to get better, right? So, today we're going to be talking about leadership management. I've got a couple of different chapters we're going to go over. We've got chapter 14, 15, and 16. Guys, I know this isn't the most exciting content, but for those of you that are looking at going into management, it is important to know, and it'll be good just to have kind of a general idea. So chapters aren't too long. We're going to just go ahead and get right through it. So let's begin here. We're going to start with chapter 14, and that is budgeting and managing fiscal resources. This is going to be something that's very important to managers and to organizations alike. So the budgeting process, the budget itself is a quantitative statement. It identifies plans and expectations for the next year typically. It provides a foundation for managing and evaluating financial performance. It also identifies how resources, including money, time, and people, are going to be acquired and used to support planned services in a specific time frame. And then it also is going to ensure that resources are available when needed. For budgeting, this is going to be the process of planning. It does compare results and expectations. It involves reviewing goals and objectives of nurses and the organization. It allows priorities to be set. In order to plan the budget, the organization needs to know the area demographics, sources of revenue, statistics. Those are going to include numbers like admissions, census, length of stay, acuity, and projected occupancy for outpatient procedures. They also need to know about the wages, including projecting for cost of living raises, prices, equipment costs, staff mixture, any regulatory changes that may be coming up in that budget period, and organizational changes that are projected. And then finally, they're really going to rely heavily on past experience and historical data. So there are some different approaches to budgeting. There are some different budget formats. So those may include cost centers, revenue centers, profit centers, and investment centers. So with cost centers, the manager is going to be responsible for predicting, documenting, and managing the costs of the unit. For a revenue center, the manager is going to be responsible for generating the revenue. So basically, they're going to be responsible for increasing the patient volume. With profit centers, managers are responsible for generating revenues and managing costs to produce a profit. And then with investment centers, the managers are responsible for generating revenues and managing assets. Different types of budgets. We've got the incremental budget. This is going to be a budget that provides an itemized list of expenses, which can be divided into salary and non-salary items. It's like a line item budget. I don't know, you may be more familiar with that term. The budget proposal is going to be based on past results or expected expenditures for the year. One advantage to the incremental budget is that it's going to have a simplistic preparation process. But a disadvantage to this is that it discourages cost efficiency. I'm sure you guys are really familiar with that. Commonly, a lot of people gripe about it happening with the government. So what happens is that with this incremental budget, the managers, when they are getting close to rebudgeting, they will spend every penny in their budget that they currently have to make sure that they get at least that much for the next budget. So it doesn't really promote cost efficiency because the managers are constantly trying to get that money out of there to make sure they start with a good amount to begin with. For the zero-based budget, this is going to be where they use the zero as the base for next year's budget. So basically what happens is your budget starts at zero. The manager is required to justify the costs that they are requesting funding for. One advantage of this, again, is going to be that the costs have to be justified. A disadvantage to this is that it's a very time-consuming process. And then with fixed or variable budgets, for fixed budgets, there are specific amounts set in the budget. And then for variable, adjustments can be made during the year to those budgets. The operating budget, this is going to look at the annual budget, the organization's statement of expected revenues and expenses for the next year. Organizations will use a fiscal year. It's different everywhere you go, but basically it's going to be a specified 12-month period. So it could be January to December. It could be July to June. I mean, it just really depends on how your organization has it set up. So it's going to be that specified 12-month period. And what they're going to do is they're going to measure operational and financial performance during that time frame. The revenue budget is going to represent the patient care income. So you're dealing with reimbursement as part of that budget. That's obviously with healthcare reform, a big concern for organizations is reimbursement since it's changed so much. So predetermined pay coming in to the organization. I'm just trying to think of a better way to phrase that, but basically what happens is, as with Medicare, there are fixed costs per case. So you're getting a set amount for specific issues. There are also negotiated rates. Those may be per diems, where there is a specified amount paid per patient per day. Negotiated discounts that the organization is able to make. And then there's capitation, which is going to be one rate per member per month, regardless of the service. So they're going to get the same amount regardless of what they do. Now, the projections for this budget are based on the volume and patient mix, as well as rates and discounts. Projections are determined based on historical data. So a lot of this budgeting is going to be revolving around past history. And healthcare reform, again, has and is going to continue to impact reimbursement and planning of budgeting. Next, we have the expense budget. So that's going to consist of salary and non-salary costs. Again, we're going to talk about cost centers. Those are typically going to be the nursing units in the hospital. It's going to be the smallest area of activity within an organization for which costs are accumulated. So you have revenue producing cost centers and you have non-revenue producing cost centers. So places like lab and radiology, those are going to be revenue producing. Places like environmental services and administration, those are non-revenue producing. For your classification of costs, you have fixed costs, which again are going to remain the same throughout the budget period. Variable costs are going to depend on and change related to your patient volume and acuity. Direct costs are going to be directly affecting patient care, so that's going to include salaries of nursing personnel. And then indirect costs are necessary costs that have nothing to do with patient care. That's going to be like your security or your maintenance personnel. So determining your salary or personnel budget, basically, again, this is going to be a projection of the costs that are paid and charged. You have to take into consideration the benefits, full-time employees and full-time employees that are able to cover benefit time. So basically, when you're looking at those benefits, what they do is they calculate the number of full-time employees they have, and then obviously every full-time employee has sick time, things like that that they can take off. So you also need to factor in salaries for the full-time employees that are going to be required to cover that paid time off. So again, your benefit time is going to be vacation, holiday, sick, whatever it may be, mental health days. Everybody needs one of those now and then, right? So there is a calculation to determine your benefit time. You are going to take the sum of paid time off per employee, and you're going to multiply that time times the number of hours per shift. So for instance, if you work a 12-hour shift, it's going to be the sum of your paid time off times 12. And then you divide that by your annual full-time employee base. So shift differentials are another important thing to consider. They are going to be either a set percentage or they may be a dollar amount. It's different depending on where you're at. Now, there's also overtime. This is going to be a projection that's based on the employee type and, again, your historical data. On-call hours, if your facility uses those, they want to have an estimation of how many on-call hours they will need. And then some facilities also offer premiums. So if you get certified, you may get a $1 raise, or if you get your bachelor's, you may get a raise, things like that. Those are going to be those premiums. Salary increases, so you have merit increases typically every year, and then cost of living increases as needed. And then any additional considerations are going to be changes in technology, support staff, and billing changes. There is a calculation in your book on page 190 for determining overtime hours, if you want to take a look at that. So managing supply and non-salary expense budget, this is obviously going to be very important. So these are going to be patient-related supplies, office supplies, rental fees, maintenance costs, and equipment service contracts. The review of historical data and projected changes in your patient populations are going to help you kind of budget for these things. And then again, you have a calculation. You're going to take the total expense amount and multiply that by the inflation factor plus 1. Lots of math in this leadership management. Okay, your capital budget. You've got renovations, construction, and replacement equipment that is going to fall into this budget. It is going to be defined based on certain criteria. Typically, items have to have an expected performance greater than a year, and they have to be above a specific dollar value. These are going to have a limited amount. Usually a specific department is going to be responsible for obtaining the equipment. So typically the manager is not going to call, the place that sells the bedside monitors and order 20 for her unit. Typically the manager is going to notify the specific department and they will go about getting the equipment. The benefit to this is going to be that obviously the specific department is probably going to have relationships built with some of the equipment companies and may be able to negotiate discounts or things like that. And also a lot of times when you buy in bulk, so if there's more than one unit that needs the same items, you may get a discounted price. So it just works better for one specific department to take care of those equipment purchases. Now your timetable for budgeting, this is horrible to me. I hate all this math anyways. It's just not my thing. I could do it absolutely, but do I want to? Not so much. And then it talks about your timetable for doing this budget is 3 to 6 months to prepare. That's a lot of time invested. And again, I totally understand the importance of having a budget. It is important, not only for the unit, but also for the organization. It's just not my bag. So, for those of you that are interested in doing this, I give you props. The process for budgeting. First, the manager is going to go about determining what their unit needs. They can do this based on employee feedback. A lot of times they will ask employees, do you have the equipment and tools to do your job? And, you know, everybody always asks for something. So if there's a trend in the equipment needs that the employees are asking for, they can determine that. The biggest thing about this is the manager is going to have to be able to defend their priorities and their needs, because this proposal is going to go from the manager and it's going to travel up through management typically. So it may go from the manager to the director of the unit, and then maybe to the CNO, and then to executive management, who's going to review and approve it. The thing about it is every time this budget touches another person's hands, it's usually going to be adjusted. So, you know, the manager for the unit can say, okay, I need XYZ. And then the director for the unit can say, well, really, they only need XY. And then so on and so forth. So as you go up through the ranks, you're probably going to be losing some items or some money. Significant changes may be made before you have final approval of the budget. That is why it is important for the manager to be able to defend what their priorities are and what they absolutely have to have. And then finally, after executive management looks at it and approves it, it's going to go to the board of directors or designated shareholders. They are the final stop in the approval process. Monitoring budgetary performance. More math talk here. We're going to talk about variances. These are going to be very important. They are the difference between the budgeted amount and the actual amount. They have to be justified. Very important. So basically, summary reports are going to be provided to managers at regular intervals. With everything being electronic these days, that's much, much easier to do, much less tedious. You can just print a report from the computer and forward it to your managers. So the summary reports are going to show where they're at with their budget, what they were allotted for their budget, whether they're over or under, how much time they have left until they get a new budget, things like that. So they will be able to keep pretty close track of what's going on with their money. And then the manager is going to document budgeting factors throughout the year to prepare for the upcoming budget. So again, go back to thinking about, okay, it takes you 3 to 6 months to prepare for this budget. That's every year that you're doing this. So I know managers don't have time to begin with, let alone 3 to 6 months to dedicate to a budget. But the budget is so important for their success. So what is best practice is going to be for the manager to keep track, keep notes, keep a notebook, however it works for them, but keep track of things that are impacting their budget, either, positively or negatively, and also keep track of the things that they really do need or don't need, so that when it comes time to prepare the budget, they have a year's worth of data to tell them really what they need to do to plan. For the variance analysis, this is going to identify the causes of the variance. It is going to be considered a favorable or an unfavorable variance. It's pretty self-explanatory, but basically the favorable variances are going to be those that allow increased revenue, and the unfavorable variances are going to be decreased revenue. Calculation for this is going to be the dollar variance divided by the amount budgeted times 100. So you may have salary variances. Those will include a couple of different things. You may have volume variances, which is going to be a difference in the budgeted and actual workload requirements. You may have an efficiency variance, which is going to be the difference between budgeted and actual nursing care hours provided. And then you may have a rate variance, which is the difference in budgeted and actual hourly rates paid. For your non-salary expenditure variances, these may be due to changes in patient volume, patient mix, supply, quantities, or prices that are paid. So now let's talk a little bit about position control. This is going to be a comparison of actual numbers of employees to the number of budgeted full-time employees for the unit. So everyone is going to have a list of approved budgeted full-time employee positions. This is going to include the nurse manager, RNs, LPNs, CNAs or PCTs, and so on and so forth. Some things that are going to affect budgetary performance, reimbursement problems. Again, this is major with healthcare reform. You've got a couple of different scenarios here. If the insurance company is refusing to pay, for instance, if a patient is ready for discharge and then the physician decides to keep them for one extra day, then a lot of times the insurance company will refuse to pay for that one extra day and say, well, you know, the patient didn't really need to be there, so we're not going to pay you for that day. So your book on page 195 goes into alternative positive solutions for the organization. You can take a look at those. But for instance, the insurance company is refusing to pay for that last day. So what happens, one of the things that can be done is that you have the physician contact the insurance company with basically specific proof that demonstrates that yes, there actually was a reason for the patient to stay that extra day. Things like that. You also have scenarios where the patient is going to refuse to pay for services. So for instance, your book talks about a patient that has a PICC line placed because they're supposed to have several weeks of antibiotics, and that's how it's justified to them. So we need to do this because an IV can't withhold all these weeks of antibiotics. So they go ahead, they place the PICC line, and then 2 days later the doc decides, oh, he doesn't really need that. We're going to change him to PO antibiotics and send him home. So the patient then refuses to pay for the PICC line, which kind of makes sense. But your book is going to go into some alternate positive solutions to that. So you may want to take a look at those just to kind of get an idea of how this works. And then finally, another reimbursement problem is going to be where the patient is unable to obtain resources for discharge. This is, I mean, they're all common occurrences, but I would say this one is something that I have dealt with very, very much so. The medication is too expensive, the supply, the equipment is not covered by their insurance, things like that. It's a very big problem. So there are sometimes ways to work around those to the benefit of everyone. Some staff impacts on budgets. So staff can have a huge impact on the budget. They can help by improving performance. Managers want to focus on improving performance in their units. So a big thing is to avoid absenteeism and turnover. Those are costly things. You can also have a quality improvement team that works on quality improvement projects. And then bonuses and raises are going to obviously make your staff happy. So that can improve your performance. The textbook also talks a little bit about magnet hospital performance, how they do things differently. So a big part of this is going to be educating the staff about budgeting, because a lot of times the bedside nurses have no clue that their manager has anything to do with the budget to begin with. So you know, being basically upfront and opening that dialogue among the staff to educate them about budgeting makes them more accountable, and so they are aware of it and they try to make a positive impact on the budget. Empowering bedside staff. This is, again, also very important. I love these kind of ideas that Magnet has. So empowering bedside staff is going to improve their performance, which is going to obviously, again, make a positive impact on the budget. And then flexing staff. So your book goes a little bit into that. It talks about basically having some flexibility. So if you come into a full load and hammered all morning, and then all of a sudden the docs come in and discharge 20 people, well, it talks about, the charge nurse making the decision to let staff go early as able. That obviously is a staff satisfier. Who doesn't want to be told, hey, you get to go home 4 hours early? So that is all I have on budgeting, I think. So I know it was super exciting and you guys loved every minute. And 1 chapter down, 2 more to go. So we will get started on those.